pundit talk shows. There's Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests. And you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we have a very special guest. He's got an incredible new book coming up, and his name is Grant Cameron. And Grant Cameron is the recipient of the Leeds Conference International Researcher of the Year and the UFO Congress Researcher of the Year. He became involved in ufology as the Vietnam War ended in May of 1975 with personal sightings of an unknown of a UFO-type project which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. The story has been optioned for a movie. I'll have to tell us about that. These sightings led to a decade of research into the early work done by the Canadian government into the flying saucer phenomena. Cameron became the authority on the government program, and Wilbert B. Smith, who headed it up. From here, Cameron proceeded to do almost 3 decades of research into the role of the President of the United States in the UFO mystery. He is one of the foremost authorities on Hillary and Bill Clinton and their UFO connection. And most of that research can be found at the President's UFO website, which is www.presidentialufo.com. Let's see. After experiencing a mental breakdown, mental download.
Yeah, that too.
That too. I can't see. This isn't my normal computer. Downloading that. I get downloads all the time, and they feel like breakdowns. On February 26, 2012, Cameron turned his research interests away from nuts and bolts research to the role of consciousness in the UFO phenomena. This new research has expanded out to the possible involvement of extraterrestrials in modern music and in the phenomena of inspirations and downloads in science discoveries, inventions, Nobel Prizes, its music, art, books, near-death experiences, meditation, and with individuals known as savants and prodigies. So it goes on and on. This bio I'm reading is from aliencosmicexpo.com, aliencosmicexpo.com, and Grant and yours truly and Dr. Sasha Lessin. We will be meeting up there. The June 24th to 26th, 2016, at the Best Western Brant Park Inn, which we're flying into Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. Sasha, what would you like to say?
Well, this is going to be a great show. One of the things that I'm going to ask Grant is, will Billary beat Bama and Pope Frank to blabbing on the ETs? The other question I have is, what does a Trudeau rule of Canada mean in terms of disclosure, what I suspect is a heck of a lot more liberal stuff? And then there's some other stuff. I've been reading John Lay about the secret BC base, which was supposed to be the main place where the anti-grav craft were developed, and whether you know anything about that. So those are the things that are on my little agenda.
And my list is your new book. So, okay, take it away. Tell us what you want us to know. Grant Cameron.
Oh, okay. Well, recently I've gotten dragged back into the political arena. I did work on it, as the bio says, for 30 years, but I had actually dumped it all. I said, basically, I came to the conclusion the president knows. He's not going to tell you, and this is a total waste of time. And as you probably know, I sort of have my 15 seconds of fame. I managed to get the Rockefeller-Initiative documents out of the Clinton White House. It's 1,000 pages of documents that Steve Bassett talks about all the time now that are on his website. And I'd actually given those documents away. I figured, this is, I'm into consciousness now. It's more important to my understanding of what happened to me in 1975. And so I'd given the documents away. I gave all my FOIA material that I got from the Clinton White House, because what happened was when I got the 1,000 pages of documents from the Clinton White House in 2000, it gave me all the names of all the people who had been involved. And so what happens with a president, when a president leaves office, he has 5 years to work on the papers from the administration, to do his memoirs and do whatever he wants with them, and then they go into this arena where they're open to Freedom of Information Act requests. So I knew exactly when the thing would open up, the FOIAs, and I filed immediately, and I filed about 100 FOIA requests with the Clinton Library for all the names and all the people and all the different events that took place. And so you'll see a lot of the stuff, like the famous Hillary Clinton with the book on this implications of the discovery of extraterrestrial life, where that all came through my FOIAs, where I pulled the photographs and all this kind of stuff. But I had given up on it, and I had sort of given the stuff. I gave some to the main set of files I gave to Dr. Joe Bookman, who was one of the moderators at the Citizens Hearing in Washington, D.C. for Steve Bassett a couple of years ago. And he had run for the Independence Party and was very much into politics. So I said, well, here's the documents. Good luck. Make sure, something happens with them. You do something with them. And I'm on to other things. And then suddenly Hillary Clinton made this disclosure. Well, actually, she didn't do it. This is one of the sort of the illusions that people have, is that Hillary has brought this issue up and that she's using this for votes or whatever. And it's really not true. Hillary did not bring it up. Hillary has never brought up the UFO subject on the campaign trail. She has answered 4 questions. She's been asked the questions, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But anyway, in December 30th, she was asked by a reporter at the Conway Daily Sun in New Hampshire, which is a key newspaper now, because this is the one of the first 2 states that starts the presidential election cycle. And people who are running for president will spend up to a year there, because the whole deal is if you can win New Hampshire or Iowa, you get the momentum, and that gives you a good start to winning the whole thing. If you lose those, you're basically out of the presidential race. So this newspaper was asking all the different people in the campaign except for Trump. And the reason they didn't ask Trump was because Trump really doesn't talk to people. He was just sort of flying around in his 757 jumbo jet, and he doesn't. All the rest of them were in buses, going from town to town, doing the town halls, answering questions, talking to people. But Trump didn't do any of that. He just would appear for a big rally and then fly back out again. And so this Damon Steer, who was the reporter, had Hillary, and I didn't realize he'd actually asked Hillary in 2007. When she came through during for her first run for president, and asked her about the UFO stuff, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I was very interested in it." And she said, this kind of shocked me. She said, "Do you know?" She said to Damon, "Do you know that the most requested item at the Clinton Library was FOIAs, or was the most requested item at the Clinton Library was UFOs?" Mm-hmm. Which kind of shocked me, because that was my stuff, and I figured, like, all these years, I figured, like, nobody's paying attention. The president's, not saying anything, nobody's doing anything, and suddenly here you get some woman who's running for president who's very aware of what I did at the library, and the fact that UFOs was of great interest, and that there's a lot of FOIAs filed on her husband's papers. So she stated to him, "Yeah, I'm interested in the subject." And then this year, on December 30th, she made the announcement to Damon. She said, "Yeah, John Podesta and I promised John that if I become president, I will release the UFO files, as many as I can. I will look at national security implications, and I will release what I can. And when I heard that, I went, oh my goodness, here I give all the stuff away. And I looked at the polls, and you could see already in December that unless something very unusual happens, she's going to be the president. Oh, yeah. And I could see the polls coming, and so I went like, wow. I mean, I've written a lot of stuff on the Clintons. I think on my website there's just piles of stuff. And so I figured, well, I'll just throw all the stuff together in a book and just basically do an authoritative history on the Clintons and UFOs, because they've been very involved and very interested. And so I put it all together, and now it's about to come out. It doesn't get into, I always tell people it's not a political book, and every time I sort of bring it up on Facebook, all the Hillary haters come out, and I keep saying, well, don't pay attention to Hillary. I really don't care. It's got nothing to do with the election. It's just the fact that these two people were very interested in UFOs. They're very powerful people, and Hillary has made this announcement that she will disclose. And I stay away from all the I have 3 levels of conversation. Of course, my mother or somebody when I was very young taught me this. Your highest level of conversation is ideas about ideas. Your second level of conversation is about things, and your third level of conversation is gossip about people who aren't in the room. So there really is no gossip about the Clintons or what happened with the Clintons and stuff like that. But there is a book for people who are into that and want to see all the sexual innuendos that happened and what happened. And there's a Secret Service agent who's now coming out with a book on the June the 28th, and he will probably outsell my book by about 1 million times. And he's was there. He was one of the people that testified on the Monica Lewinsky, what was going on there. And he's coming out with a book about what was going on behind the scenes with the Clintons. My story, the Clinton book, is just basically what happened, why are the Clintons interested, and I get into a long conclusion. And I have changed. If you go to my website, I've said all along, I've sort of bought into this idea that the presidents didn't know, the presidents were out of the loop. And so for about the last 60 pages of the book, I go through the question, does the president know? And I've absolutely changed my opinion. I say there's no doubt the president knows. The whole story that there's a Wizard of Oz or some, evil cabal running the show, this is disinformation to keep it away from the president. Mm-hmm. And so I go through this whole thing. I go through the constitutional aspects of would the president know? I go through all the different presidents and reference different items. There's an appendix that I have where I reference if the president doesn't know, then why did this happen? Why did this happen? And I go through events like Richard Nixon showing Jackie Gleason the bodies. Well, if he doesn't know what's going on, he hasn't got access to the bodies. So there's all these indications. But the ones that really sort of set me to change my mind are Barack Obama statements. Because if you listen to Bill Clinton when he was in president or when he talks about it, he basically just goes the party line. He basically just says, no, I didn't know what's going on. There's a government inside the government. I didn't know what's going on and stuff like that. And when people like Ben Hansen do reviews on his interviews, it shows that he's being deceptive, that he's really not telling the truth. But if you see Barack Obama, and I detail these in the book, Barack Obama's gone through a number of different situations where he's been asked about aliens, UFOs, Area 51, and he has never lied. He has never said, I don't know what's going on. He has said such things as when he was in Roswell, New Mexico, talking about the Roswell crash. He said, we'll keep our secrets here, which clearly indicates he knows what's going on. He told Will Smith's son, Jaden, he said, I can neither confirm nor deny that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth, but if they had, and if there had been a top secret meeting, it would have taken place in this very room. And they were in the Situation Room at the time when he told this when he was asked.
What about this kid that he said, if I told you, then I'd have to kill you?
That was in Roswell where he said that. He said that, and he's used that joke a number of times. He was first asked by this guy works for CNN now. I can't remember his name. He's got a long, complex name, but he works for CNN. But originally he had a show out of it was either Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. And in 2009, when Barack first came in, he asked him the question about the Book of Secrets. And this is when the movie came out with the Book of Secrets in it. And he said, my kids have watched the movie, and I just need to ask you, is there a book of secrets? And my kids are interested. And that's when Barack first used that joke. He said, yeah, there is, but if I told you what was in it, I'd have to kill you. So he used that joke with the kids, what he says in Roswell, New Mexico. And this is 2012. And New Mexico, even though it's going to vote on Tuesday, is no longer a swing state. It's more like a Democratic state now. But it used to be a swing state that would go either way. So every election, right at the end of the election, the presidential candidates would show up in Roswell, New Mexico. And when you go to Roswell, New Mexico, everybody knows the story, so everybody has to do some sort of UFO or Roswell joke. So Bill was there in 2012 during his re-election there, and that's when he said, the question that's asked to me most by 9 and 10-year-old kids is, Mr. President, what's the story with Roswell? Is it true what they say? And that's when he says, and I tell the little kids, I say, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you. And then everybody laughs, and he says, and you can see their eyes get all big. And then he stops, and I've done enough work on presidential speeches, especially I did a lot of work with the Reagan speeches, trying to find out why did Ronald Reagan put all these alien invasion remarks? Was it signed off by people? Did people dispute this being in the speeches? Because people have to realize that when a president makes a speech, like a State of the Union address will be drafted 30 times, and it will be reviewed by 25 different agencies. And so it's reviewed word by word, and every agency has to sign off on it. So every agency will take a look, and the CIA may say, I don't want this in the speech, change this. State Department, everybody gets to sign off on the speech. So I would study these speeches, and so I got to understand how presidential speeches are written, and I know it's very careful. There's no really, he's really not speaking off the cuff. That's, Donald Trump. Everything is the way he's accusing Hillary right now of reading off a teleprompter. That's how it works. It's very carefully orchestrated. You have a group of 100 people. They're doing focus groups. Everybody's trying to figure out what to say, what not to say, stay away from this, go to this subject. And so what happened in this speech is Barack makes this joke because he's got to make the Roswell joke, and then he hesitates, and you can see if you watch the clip of the speech, the video, he hesitates, and he's not into the speech, and that's when he says, we'll keep our secrets here. And then he starts the speech. So this was an ad lib. This wasn't in the speech, and I can almost guarantee it wasn't in the speech. And so he says that, and when he was on Kimmel, of course, Kimmel is very interested in UFOs as well. So of course, everybody that comes on the Kimmel show talks about UFOs because he always asks them about it. So what had happened, what started it was Bill Clinton went on there, and Bill Clinton was asked a UFO question. And of course, Kimmel was saying, if I was there, my hand would just be off the Bible. The Bible is to be hot, and I'd be running to the White House to find out, about the alien stuff. And of course, Bill says, well, in my second administration, we had that thing about Roswell, and I looked into it, and he said, I pulled all the files and I read them, which sort of goes contrary to the fact. He says, I don't know what's going on. I'm out of the loop. I don't know what's going on. But I got all the Roswell files, and I looked at all the Roswell files. And he looked at all the Area 51 files. But then he's saying, well, he doesn't know what's going on. So anyway, he says, I'm embarrassed to say I looked into it, and no, I don't think a UFO crashed at Roswell, New Mexico. And, of course, that was the one that when Ben Hansen did the review on it, it showed that Bill Clinton was being deceptive. So what happens is then Barack Obama comes on the Kimmel show, and we're almost certain, we can't prove it, but we're almost certain that Barack Obama knew the UFO question was coming. Because you don't put a president on a big show like that without knowing what the questions are. It's very, as I said, it's very orchestrated. You have all these people who control what the president's asked, who gets to say what. Because the president is a big thing. They don't want him, looking stupid or whatever, getting into trouble. So Kimmel starts off the interview and he says, okay, I'm going to ask you about this UFO thing, and you realize they're going to be watching all the moves that you make and how you hold your hands and stuff. And Barack agrees, yes. So they're referring to the Ben Hansen review. That Ben Hansen had done this review on Bill Clinton and determined that Bill Clinton was lying. So he warns them, they're going to be watching you. They're going to do an analysis of how you react when you answer these questions. And Barack says, yeah, okay. So they start, and he asks them a couple of questions. Then he goes to the question. He said, okay, Bill said he didn't get anything. Bill said he went there and he couldn't get anything. So I got to ask you, what did you do? What did you find out? And because this is high-definition TV, when Ben Hansen does the review, when he does the analysis of Barack Obama, they're watching his lapel pin. And if you remember, this lapel pin is very famous with Barack Obama because Barack never wore a U.S. lapel pin. He always had this thing, and it was always like he was anti-American, he's against the military and stuff. And so now he always wears this lapel pin. And this is what put him down in this interview, is he's got this lapel pin, and Ben Hansen is watching the lapel pin on high-definition TV, and you can actually see Barack breathing. And so they're counting the breaths as he gets asked this question. Okay, so Bill said nothing happened. You were there. What did you do? What? And that's the ultimate question. Is as I said to many people, if you ever get a president, vice president, 4-star general of the Unified Command, somebody who might have been read in, what you want to ask him is not, what do you think about UFOs? Have you seen a UFO? That is, they're going to walk around that question. The only question you want to ask him is, have you been briefed? And that's basically what Kimmel said. What did you find out? When you got there, what did you discover? And as he's answering this question, the review on Ben Hansen's review, watching the lapel pin, shows that he's breathing at 42 times a minute. And the average breath is like 17 to 20. And this guy's almost hyperventilating. I mean, he's like petrified. And you got to remember, he's been president now for, 7 years. And he's answered lots of questions, been in a lot of stressful situations. But he's very stressed out as this question is being answered. And that's when he says, I can't reveal anything. So what Barack does is he walks around the questions, but he doesn't really lie. Like he has this, the latest one he did was this little girl. I don't know if you know the story.
On Ellen.
On Ellen. So this little girl, she's this 6-year-old presidential expert. She knows everything about the presidents and whatever. And she goes on the show, and this is totally orchestrated because if you see Ben Hansen, I asked him to do a review on it, and he did. He actually shows an earlier show where they show this kid's cue cards. And the kid can't read yet. She's only 6 years old. She can't really read. And so the questions they have for her are all picture cue cards. So they show these cue cards, and you can see that when she asks the question, she's looking off to the right, and looked like she's reading off a cue card to the right. And when Barack answers the question, he's looking straight ahead. He's reading off a cue card straight ahead of him. And so she asks him, they say, have you got a question for the president? And she says, yeah, are aliens real? And he never answers the question. He basically walks around the question, and he says, first of all, he stalls for time, and he says, what do you think? And then she says, yeah, I think so. And then he said, well, where'd you learn that? And he said, on the America's Book of Secrets. And then Ellen makes a joke, oh, well, okay, the secret's already out. And then that's when Barack says, well, I can't remember what the exact wording is, but he basically says, when we discover, we haven't talked to them yet or something like that, but when we do, you'll be the first person that I'll tell. So he basically doesn't answer the question, are aliens real? He walks around it by reading off the cue card this other canned response. So that's what Barack is doing. And I think what is happening is, I'm pretty sure Barack is uncomfortable with the issue. And I've heard from people close, one person, two people, very close, and they showed me a link that went right to the White House, to Barack Obama. And I was just floored when he showed me this link that he had. And the story that they were telling me is that they wanted out. And it was very bizarre. They said they wanted out. They're trying to figure out how to do it. And they talked about this retired general who was with the CIA and people that were these sort of retired people that are trying to orchestrate this disclosure thing. And they said they want it out, but they don't want the government's fingerprints on it. And I said to this guy who was telling me, who's not a government employee or anything, this is just somebody who the government has gotten very interested in. And I said, well, good luck. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, how do you disclose the government's fingerprints on him? And it's going to be immediately the government's going to be targeted. So Barack, I think, is uncomfortable. This is what I've heard from behind the scenes. And they're trying to figure a way to get this thing out. And so when I look at it, you see a number of things that have happened during the Obama administration that show, for example, even the Will Smith comment where he talks, I can neither confirm nor deny that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth. He knew that was going to get out. He knew that would become public. And so why did he say it? I mean, it's almost like he's taking a chance where some reporter is going to say, what's the deal, Mr. President? Is this for real? And start asking him questions, and then you could blow the whole cover up. So he's doing this, and some of the things he did that I say indicate that he's trying to sort of gradually disclose this thing are the story of Chase Brandon. Chase Brandon was this high-level CIA guy who was second most powerful guy in the CIA to be able to talk publicly on behalf of the CIA director, who goes on coast to coast in front of like 4 million plus people, and has this book that comes out on the 65th anniversary of Roswell, which is, I don't think it's a coincidence. And the book has been reviewed 8 times by the CIA, which means the CIA basically wrote the book. They basically said, change this, put this name in, change this date and stuff. And he comes out and he basically says, Roswell, I saw in these files in this box and at Langley, and Roswell was real, and it was extraterrestrial, and there were cadavers, but I'm not going to tell you anything more. And that story sort of hit the wire, but then everybody sort of dropped it. And the key part to that I say is significant is there's no way the CIA would orchestrate this thing and allow him to come out without Barack Obama's green light, because people sort of think that the CIA works on its own, like, they're doing their own thing. They do not. If you listen to Chase Brandon, or if you go to the Chase Brandon says the CIA's role is to work for the people at 60,000 feet, and that is the president, the executive office, the chairman of the House and Senate intelligence committees. That's who the CIA works for. They provide the best intelligence for those people. That's all they do. They don't sell Trump steaks. They don't sell cars. They don't do anything else. That's all they do, is they provide intelligence for the president of the United States. So when somebody from the CIA, a high-level guy from the CIA, goes public and does this, it has to have the approval. I say it has to have the approval of the president, because if it goes south, if suddenly the New York Times picks it up and starts an investigation, they're going to the president, because the president is responsible. So he does that, and this thing with Will Smith's son, and there's things that he does. What's the other one? The other one was a couple of months ago, if you remember. Suddenly the CIA, who says we have not been in UFOs since 1952. We're not interested in UFOs. There's no ETs here. There's no cover up. Suddenly puts these 2 almost like pro UFO articles on its website. On the front page of its website, the how to investigate a UFO, and it's not putting down UFOs. It's not saying UFOs don't exist. It's basically like a straight-up piece on how to investigate a flying saucer sighting, and then they start putting it on their tweet page, and they start tweeting it. And again, I would say that has to have the approval of the President of the United States, because they're not going to do that without some sort of approval. So you can see these sort of backroom maneuvers that are taking place, which goes to what I think is the whole crux of the story, is that all this stuff really has got nothing to do with Hillary Clinton, this latest thing that everybody's on now. It has to do with John Podesta. And so I'll sort of see if you got a question, and then we'll get into the Podesta thing. But the John Podesta, people, especially when I put stuff on Facebook, the Hillary haters will come out, and I always say the same thing. I say, don't watch the puppet, watch the puppet master, because Hillary has only answered 4 questions. Everything is John Podesta. It's really got not a lot to do with Hillary Clinton, except the fact that she's very interested in the subject.
Okay, so what I get is the president, instead of lying, is saying, I ain't talking. And yet his mouthpieces that represent his administration are talking in their hints. And one of the things that, like Andy Bashago and others are saying, is that and I think Steve Bassett too, is that it's got to, that if it's apparent that the Republicans man is going to get in, then Obama will get the credit for disclosure by doing it. But if it's Hillary, he can relax and let it be her shot.
I think Steve said he thought for sure that Obama's going to release it.
Yeah, he did.
He's not here to talk for himself, so we'll have to have both of you on.
Well, you're going to have him on next week, right? You're having him on next week.
Yeah. Well,
okay, so here's a question for him. Here's a question. Does he have any inside information that Obama's going to do it, or does he think that it's going to happen because of the situation? Because what I would say is a little bit different. What I would say, I call it the Podesta box. Podesta is, and I've detailed this on my on my Facebook site. I haven't put much of this on my website, but if you look at Podesta, you can get a lot of dirt on the Clintons, but you're not going to find any dirt on Podesta. Podesta's a pretty straight shooting guy. He has only a couple of interests in his life. He's big into cooking. He's big into running. He's a marathon guy. And the most important thing about him is he's what's called a Madison man. He belongs to the Madison Foundation. He is interested in James Madison. And James Madison, strange story is that if you remember the Danny Sheehan story, it takes place in the Madison Building, which is the ideal building for this to happen. He tells a story about being in the Madison Building as it was opening. This is one of the 2 main buildings of the Library of Congress in Washington. and it's the Madison Building. And above the front door of the Madison, they have this inscribed into the limestone there, and it talks about this whole idea that John Podesta lives and breathes about open government. That you cannot run a government unless the people know what's going on. It's a farce. If the people don't know what's going on, John Podesta puts it, you cannot even vote. If you don't know what the government's doing, your vote is totally useless because you don't know what you're voting on. You have to know. So he's a big guy on open government, and he's not just UFO open government. He has, for example, in a couple of years ago, he actually did an op-ed piece. Maybe it was before he went back to the Obama administration, but he does an op-ed piece, which of course is going to hurt Obama badly, where he says, you have to release the files on the drones in the Middle East. He said, we've killed 4 Americans in the Middle East, and you have to release the files. So he's big on open government, and that's his key thing. And he's also, of course, very interested in UFOs. So John Podesta he was on a couple of committees on secrecy. In 1997, there was a big congressional investigation in secrecy. He was on that, and he was very big. He was with Bill Clinton the day he walked into the White House, and he said, I walked out the door with him. So he's big with the Clintons. He's the guy that cleaned up the Monica Lewinsky mess. He's the guy that took Hillary Clinton to task for the Travelgate scandal, and apparently she went on his blacklist for a number of years. She wouldn't talk to him, and now he's running her campaign. So the Clintons are very indebted to Podesta. So you have this guy who's very much into open government, and he's very much an environmentalist, which makes me start to think he's like the rest of us. He's down the rat hole on UFO stuff, and he's big, hugely big on the environment, on saving the planet, which makes me think maybe this guy's an experiencer. Maybe he didn't just have a sighting. Maybe it's more than that. But we don't really know what got John Podesta so fired up about the UFO subject. But he's fascinated with the subject. So anyway, he's in the Clinton administration, and this is what gets back to this thing about the president knows. People may not realize Bill Clinton sort of was pressured by Podesta, but Bill Clinton is sort of an open government guy as well. And in 1994, Podesta was with him, and in one stroke of a pen in 1994, through an executive order, and this is where it comes down to understanding the Constitution when it comes down to how the UFO cover-up works. In 1994, Bill Clinton signed an executive order in which he declassified 15% of all the material in the National Archives at the stroke of a pen. He just said it's all declassified. These are all World War II records that were still being held secret. And Bill disclosed he released 15% in one stroke of a pen. In 1995, he does the famous executive order. I think it was 15829, which was the executive order that said anything over 25 years in a document has to be declassified unless you can fit it into one of 6 exemptions for national security, privacy, all these different things. But if you can't, there's no reason to keep it classified, it has to be declassified. And since 1995, for the first 10 years after that executive order was signed, there was 1 billion pages of documents were declassified under that executive order. In 1996, he does an order which releases all the satellite photograph material that had been withheld for 30 or 40 years, all the Corona satellite photos and the spy photos and stuff like that. So Bill Clinton, in his administration, it's like well over, I don't know how many billion plus documents were declassified. So Podesta is big on that. So he was trying to push Bill, I'm pretty sure, to disclose the UFO thing. And Bill, for whatever reason, didn't want to go with it. He didn't want to do it. And I say the president can, at the stroke of a pen, declassify the entire UFO thing. You can just stroke it out. Because if you look, when it comes to classification, people will say, well, the president isn't cleared to know. And this is where everybody goes off the rails. People say, well, he doesn't have the need to know. There's people running around that say they got a security clearance 15 levels above the president. Let me absolutely guarantee you the president does not have a security clearance. The president doesn't need a security clearance. And he doesn't need a security clearance because security clearances and secrecy, the secret, restricted, top secret, all the code name stuff, none of that is done by law. It's all done by executive order. That started in 1940 Roosevelt, to protect the secrets during World War II, signed an executive order that established the classifications of restricted or confidential and secret. Truman added top secret. Eisenhower added material for national security, which really made the thing take off. All security, all classification is under the control of the President of the United States. It's all run out of the executive office of the President. So you can't say, well, I've got a security clearance 15 levels above the President, because the President is running it. He's running the classification. He's running the secrecy, and he doesn't have a security clearance. He can see whatever he wants, and they may tell him, stay away from this subject, don't go near the subject, whatever. If something happens, we'll read you in on it. And he hasn't got time to read a lot of the stuff. But basically, you have to have the President in charge of what's going on, because he's the guy that's signing the secrecy order. So for whatever reason, Bill Clinton didn't do it. Then Barack Obama goes to the Barack Obama administration, and what you see is Barack Obama again doing something that he knew, it was public. He did it publicly, and that was Podesta comes back in, I think it was September or October of 2013. He goes back to the Barack Obama administration. He's working on global warming, on energy policy, and on classification, this kind of stuff. So he goes back to Barack. The day after he enters the Barack administration, Barack goes and he's giving an award at the Kennedy Center, and he's giving an award to Shirley MacLaine, and that's when he stands up. And again, this is going to get out. He does this, and you can see that he knows the history. And he says, when you become president, people ask you about Area 51, and well, I didn't know what was going on, so I had to phone up Shirley MacLaine. And of course, everybody laughs, and it's a big joke, whatever. And then he says, I'm probably the first president to publicly mention Area 51 in the public. And that's true. He knew the history. He knew that he was the first guy to actually sort of admit that this was real in public. And this is the day after after Podesta enters his administration. So you can see that he's playing with this thing, but he can't convince Barack to make the move. Although Barack is doing these sort of indirect things, like putting Chase Brandon out, by allowing the CIA to put the stuff on the website. And maybe he's doing that because he's under pressure from Podesta or whatever. And then what happens is, the day he leaves the administration, Podesta makes this famous tweet. And I remember talking to Steve Bassett about this, about what this tweet meant, and we knew this was extremely important. So at least Steve and I have been on this, that we know something was happening a year ago, in February of 2015. We knew something was up when Podesta put this tweet out. Because if you're a high-level guy in the government, you do not embarrass the President of the United States as you're leaving by doing a tweet about UFOs and sort of embarrassing the President that, you didn't come clean on the UFO thing. But he's covering himself, because what happened was, when I filed all the stuff with the Clinton Library, what happened was, as soon as Obama went back, when Podesta went back to the Obama administration in 2013, the Washington Post said, in a piece that Podesta said, now as soon as Podesta leaves, or Obama leaves the White House, everybody's going to be asking for all the correspondence between Podesta and Obama, and that's true. I'm going to file for it. And so Podesta is putting himself on the record. He's basically saying, the biggest disappointment of 2014 was I still wasn't able to get the disclosure of the UFO material. So he's basically putting himself on the record that he talked to Obama, and this has now been confirmed by Tom DeLonge, who's running around, Podesta's working with him to leak this material into the public. And DeLonge says that Podesta told him he had talked to Obama, but you could tell that from the tweet. And the interesting thing about this tweet is he copied Marie Dowd from the New York Times. The New York Times has always been seen as this sort of anti-UFO newspaper. And I remember Steve pointed out to me, I didn't realize, and that's the thing, is every time that Podesta puts something out, you read it, then read it again, then read it again, then read it again, then think about it for a couple of days, then read it again, and then you're going to maybe start to understand what he's doing, because he says he has the cult of non-personality. He likes to sit in the background and sort of pull the strings, but he doesn't really get vocal, he doesn't really explain what he's doing, but you can see he's doing something. So he copies Marie Dowd. I could not figure out for the life of me why he copied Marie Dowd. Well, why would you copy some reporter from some newspaper that hates UFOs? And it wasn't until a year later that I discovered, I was Google searching her and UFOs, and suddenly I realized that when Clinton was in, and you got to remember that Podesta was there when the Clintons were there. He was the chief of staff. There was two Roswell reports. The first, and Bill greenlighted the Air Force to do these Roswell reports. The Air Force didn't want to do them. I mean, it's not the UFO. They want to get into UFOs. They were forced to do it. The General Accounting Office was doing an investigation. Rockefeller wanted the Roswell thing investigated, so Bill Clinton greenlighted it. So they do this report on the Roswell thing, and it comes out in 1995, the final report, and it says, Mr. President, there was no UFO crash at Roswell, there's no alien thing, there's no cover-up, and the documents are all missing. And Bill goes and lights this Christmas tree thing in November of 1995, and it's there he makes this challenge to the Air Force. He says, he reads this letter from Ryan. He says, Ryan, if you're out in the audience tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, a UFO did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico. But if they did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know. And the Air Force has to go back out for a second time, spend another $20 million to do another report, and that's when they come out with this stupid crash test dummy thing. We drop these 6-foot-tall wooden dummies with Air Force uniforms and parachutes on them and big, huge signs on them. It says, we'll give you $25 if you turn this dummy back in. And people, because some of the legs broke off and fingers broke off, everybody mistook them for the aliens in 1947, these 4-foot-tall aliens. So what happens is Marie Dowd from the New York Times is at that news conference when they make this announcement. If you remember this poor Air Force guy that has to make this announcement about these crash test dummies, there's people that are laughing. The reporters are just like, I mean, this is the stupidest thing you ever heard. And Marie Dowd writes an article and basically says, this proves that it's for real. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and this confirms that this is true. These people, the Roswell thing is real. Why would they come up with such a stupid explanation? And so, like 10 years later, or it's 20 years later, Podesta puts her in a tweet, and this famous tweet. So you'll see he copies Marie Dowd. That's why he copies Marie Dowd, because she's a pro UFO person, and so he copies this. And then he comes, and this is where he builds what I call the box. And this is where Podesta gets dragged into this, or Obama gets dragged into this. He makes the tweet, and then in October, Hillary Clinton is doing an interview with Marie Dunham. And it's a video interview, and it's kind of a powder puff interview. And at the end, Podesta put tweets, and he says, Lena, real good interview with Hillary. Next time, ask her about the aliens. Mm-hmm. And then I knew for sure something was up, that Podesta was doing something. And you got to realize Podesta is the smartest guy in the room. Podesta runs this, he started the Center for American Progress in Washington, the big Democratic think tank. 40 people from the high-level people in the Barack Obama administration come from that think tank. I mean, he's very, very powerful, very, very influential inside the Democratic Party. He has the first and last word on everything in the Hillary Clinton campaign. So when he says to Leah Dunham, when he says, ask her about the aliens, I immediately knew, because I know how campaigns work, that he had pulled it. Because what you do in a campaign is you have these focus groups. So you have the focus group, and then you put an issue in front of them, and you wire these people up or get them to push buttons 1, 2, 3 or whatever, and they will get this thing, and that's how they determine what do you talk about, what don't you talk about. Mm-hmm. This didn't poll very well with the focus group. Stay away from this, go to this. So when he said about the aliens, I knew everything had changed, that he had polled the issue, and it was no longer a toxic issue. Now, everybody's now agreed with me that this probably is no longer a toxic issue. Because you remember back in 2008, when Kucinich got outed, he had this UFO sighting at Shirley MacLaine's house. He was like 50 feet away from this thing. It was over the swimming pool. Him, Shirley MacLaine's bodyguard, and the bodyguard's girlfriend were there. They make drawings. He had this voice in his head. They knew something was going on all day. The Wall Street Journal had this big investigation of this thing. And he's asked in the presidential debate, did you see a UFO and did you hear voices? And, of course, he said, well, I saw a UFO, but I didn't hear voices, and Jimmy Carter saw a UFO, and he becomes all defensive, and his campaign is off the rails. I mean, he's dead. I mean, every article after that said the crazy guy saw the UFO. So it had changed. You could tell when when Podesta brought this up, you got to realize a presidential campaign, Hillary's campaign, is going to be $1 billion to $1.5 billion to run this campaign to get it to the end. And you are not going to bring up the stupid UFO issue and kill $1 billion campaign unless you pulled it, which meant to me, as soon as I heard that, he's pulled the issue and things have changed. This is a safe issue. And the way it works in presidential campaigns is you don't care about, if you're a Democrat, you don't care about the Republicans. They're all going to vote for the Republicans, and the Republicans don't care about the Democrats. The only thing you worry about in an election is swing voters. So you only go to swing states. That's why nobody ever shows up in Louisiana. Nobody ever shows up in Mississippi. Nobody campaigns there. Nobody campaigns in Texas. You campaign in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Mexico. You campaign where the swing voters are, where there's these swing states where you try to get those people to move over. And that's what happened in 1995 when Bill Clinton went to the Rockefeller Ranch. That was the last place in the world Bill Clinton wanted to go in 1995 was to the Rockefeller Ranch. He wanted to go to the Hamptons. He would spend his holidays at the Hamptons, having cocktail parties and golfing with his rich buddies there. And Dick Morris, who was running the campaign in 1995, Bill Clinton was down. He was down in the polls. And his campaign manager, Dick Morris, had said that the swing voters are interested in the ecology. They're interested in camping and, rafting, and they're into technology. And so you got to go to the Rockefeller Ranch and you've got to do the white water rafting and ride around on a horse and stuff like that because they're going after the swing voters. And Dick Morris, if you read his book, talked about Bill Clinton phoning him from the Rockefeller Ranch, and he said he had to hold the phone a foot away from his head because Bill Clinton was screaming, "Get me the hell out of here!" It's like it's the last place he wanted to be, but because it's swing voters. So again, you have these swing voters. So this is something that Podesta thought would move the swing voters, and that's what I first thought. And then I changed my opinion when I saw what had happened. So it doesn't happen. He brings this up in September, October. He brings up this thing. Ask her about the aliens. So he's trying to encourage reporters to ask Hillary about the aliens. So you know this is going to happen, and something's in the works. Podesta's got something going. So Damon Steer asked her at the end of December, and that's when she says, yes, I've made this promise to John that if I get in, I'm going to disclose the UFO thing, and I'm going to figure out what's going on at Area 51. And he asked all the other people at that as well. And like Kasich, he asked Kasich the question, what about the UFO thing? And he said, nah, I don't really believe it. And he said, but my brother-in-law said, he's really into it. And he said, if you become president, you got to go to Area 51 right away and figure out what's going on. And Cruz, he asked Cruz about it, and he showed Cruz these two famous documents that I discovered in the Rockefeller documents that showed that Hillary Clinton was in the middle of the Rockefeller-Initiative. She was the key person in the whole Rockefeller-Initiative. But he showed her these two documents, and Cruz was really sort of taken back by the fact that Hillary was involved in this. And he said, yeah, he might do something on Area 51 if he got in. So everybody was asked, but Hillary made this thing, and you can see the way she phrases it. If she gets asked, you'll always see she says, I promised John to do it, and I'm interested, but I think this is open government. So she goes with this John Podesta thing. She says, it's not really something that's on my radar. It's John Podesta's issue. And because I'm into open government, I'm going to do it for John. And then when you see John doing the interviews, he's done a number of interviews. You got to remember, he doesn't really do that many interviews. He does these interviews, and he's done more interviews on this subject in the last couple of months than he's done in his whole life. And it's almost like when the issue gets sort of slows down, as what happened about 2 days ago, he went back out and he talked about the alien thing again. And this time he linked it into black programs. He said we sort of need it out there instead of it going to black programs, which he basically confirmed that the stuff is going to black programs. And that it should, and it's this open government thing. The people should know what's going on rather than this stuff going to black programs. And so he keeps bringing it up. And he actually at one point during this famous interview that he does with KLS-TV, and you got to remember KLS-TV in Nevada. This is just before the Nevada caucus, the primary there. He goes and he does this interview. They're the ones that broke the Area 51 story. And John Podesta, of course, when he was in the White House, actually phoned Area 51 because it was on the X-Files, and he actually phoned Area 51 and asked them what's going on there. So he's very interested in Area 51, and he does this interview, and that's when he has these key words. He says, I think I convinced her. I think I convinced Hillary to do it. And that shows you that he tried to talk to Bill. He couldn't convince Bill to do it. Make the move. Just sign it. He tried to talk to Obama. Wouldn't do it. But he says, I think I convinced her. I think she's going to do it. And then Hillary will come out and say, I made this promise to John to do it, and I want open government, and I'm going to do it. And what John says, which is very critical, especially for the people who are making the claim that there's the Wizard of Oz is running the cover-up or whoever is running the cover-up, he says she has to sit down and she's got to look at the material and she's got to weigh it and determine national security and release what she can. So he's not saying she's got to go and talk to the evil cabal. She doesn't have to go talk to David Rockefeller and his business guys from Europe or whatever. She just has to sit down. She has to look at the material. She has to make the decision. And he's talked about it before, about the way the UFO thing works. He says you have to weigh the UFO thing, weigh national security on the one side versus what he calls unthinking secrecy. It's fine to have secrecy. It's fine to have national security. If it's national security, keep it national security. But if it's not national security, the people have to know. So that's when he says Hillary has to sit down. She has to look at the material and evaluate it and disclose what she can, which is my new view on what's going on, is that she can put all the material. And Hillary's even confirmed it herself. She says, if I can get agreement, she says, I'll look at the national security implications, and if I can get agreement, I will release what I can. So It comes down to she's going to have the material in front of her. Then she's going to talk to the director of national intelligence, the head of the NSA, whoever's in this loop, or I would say MJ-12. That she talks to these people and she tries to release what she can. And John has said clearly, people say really nothing's happened, but John Podesta is a guy who was in the Clinton administration the entire time they were there. He was the chief of staff. He got the presidential daily briefing, the top secret briefing every day. He knows what's going on. He said there are classified documents that can be declassified. So
it's always up to the president to ultimately say, should I release this, or when I've evaluated the evidence, is this in the interest of national security? I can, anti-grav craft that can maneuver the way UFOs do seem to always, if the president wishes, to be in the interest of national security that we don't divulge this.
Yeah, that was brought up this weekend at the conference. We think this is just another way of hijacking the release of the information, and they're actually going to monitor it very closely, and it's going to take another 100 years for us to really have enough disclosure to make it.
Okay, but that's national security. You're forgetting John Podesta said, he's on the record. This is a quote. He's on the record saying this on video. There are classified documents that can be declassified.
Oh.
And now let's get back to the box. I say he built a box. Because I said, when you see John, you read it 5-6 times, think about it for a couple days, read it 5 or 6 times more, and then you realize what John's doing. He's a very, very smart guy. So he built a box. He couldn't get Obama to do it. So what he does is he says, ask Hillary about the UFOs. And then you see what happened. They ask Hillary, and then suddenly one newspaper picks up, another newspaper picks up, and the Washington Post picks up, and Washington Times picks up. And then May the 10th, the New York Times picks up the story. And they have never done a straight UFO piece ever. And suddenly they pick it up, and they run the story, and it goes viral. Suddenly the focus changes. And suddenly I go, oh, I know what John's doing. It's not even going to get to Hillary. Hillary's not going to take office until January the 20th of next year. This thing is not going to last till January the 20th next year. Basically, what is happening, you see, May the 11th in the White House press briefing, suddenly this earnest guy, the press secretary for Obama, is suddenly facing UFO questions, and the tone of the questions has completely changed. You got to remember. The questions the last time a press secretary for the president has answered a question on UFOs was 1997, when Webster Hubbell came out with his book, Friends in High Places. And that was when they asked, Deborah Orrin from the New York Post asked the question, did President Clinton ask Webster Hubbell to go out and look for UFOs? And he said, no, we gave that to the alien. And I write about this in this book, this Pelot, this famous alien from the Weekly World News. No, we gave that job to the alien. And then she said, and she goes to follow-up. She gets to do a follow-up. She says, my follow-up question is it true what Mr. Hubbell writes in his book? And he said, I'm not going to comment on what private people write in their private books. And Deborah Orrin, in a later interview, says, I sat there and I waited for the rest of the press corps to follow up on that. and they all rolled over and played dead because they were afraid of losing their credentials. So it was not asked till 1996.
Wow.
The time before that, the question was only asked to Eisenhower in 1954. And January of 1954. So that was the time before that White House press, that somebody in the White House had to directly answer a UFO question. And that one, Eisenhower, who everybody said, Eisenhower knew what was going on. He played exactly the same game as they're playing now. He said, I asked an Air Force guy, and he said there was really nothing to it. That was Eisenhower's answer to the question. So they've always played the same game. He played like he didn't know what was going on. The president doesn't know, and that's what they're trying to prevent. Because if it's the Wizard of Oz, or if it's some secret cabal, or whatever you want to say, you can't interview them. You can't talk to them. But I know what the president's phone number is. I can give you the president's phone number. I know what it is. Everybody knows what the president's phone number is. Everybody knows where the president lives. If it becomes known that the president of the United States has been briefed on the subject of UFOs, then it's for real. You don't brief the president on a subject that's not real. If it becomes known that the president was briefed on the subject of UFOs, the cover-up is going to end in hours. Forget about 100 years. It's going to end in hours because, and that's what's changed in the tone of these. If you look at the questions, there's been 3 questions asked since May the 10th. And the questions are different. It's not, this story came out, yuck, 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 everybody laughs, whatever. It's serious, guys. This is ABC asked the one question, and basically it's saying,
Okay, we have to pause. So we're going to pick up with this after the break, and it'll be about 3 minutes, Grant. Thank you. Just hold that thought, make a note where you left off, and we'll be back in 3 minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin, and our very special guest, Grant Cameron. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on freedomslips.com and donate whatever you can. $5, $10, $15, $20, $100, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. We do thank you very much for your donation. And we're having a super exciting conversation with Grant Cameron about disclosure. Will it happen under Obama, under Hillary's new administration? If she wins? Sasha, what would you like to say before we bring
one of the most interesting things so far, Grant, about our interview is that the idea that the president is in charge, and like old Harry said, this is where the buck stops, rather than some special secret off-budget cabal that is in charge. And so the president is in charge, one thing. The other thing that strikes me is that the Dowd thing is so important. I think it was perhaps Stanton Friedman that said the dummies that were allegedly on the cover-up story hadn't yet been manufactured or developed, and so that seems to be some critical evidence that they're lying. And then Stanton Friedman was saying, yes, everybody in the government agrees that if it's in an interest of national security, it's our duty to lie.
Yeah, you actually have to. It's law, by law. It's what's called an unacknowledged special access program. So you have special access programs, which are these ultra high secret programs, black budget programs. Are you still there? Oh, shoot.
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, okay. Oh, I just something went silent. Yeah, so you have these, but then you have unacknowledged special access programs, which by definition, even the existence of the program is classified. So if someone says to you, "Does this program exist?" you have to lie. You have no choice but to lie. If you, and that's one of the problems I have with the whistleblowers, if somebody comes and says, I'm here and I've got this information and I know what's going on and I'm going to tell you. My first question, and I've never had one of these whistleblowers come to me, would be, are you a patriotic American citizen? And you say, well, yeah. And did you sign a secrecy oath to, obey the president, uphold the Constitution, and keep this secret? Yeah. Well, you violated that. So now you're going to come and say you're going to tell me the truth. I mean, if anybody, you can see that with the emails, with Hillary Clinton emails, there's these special access emails that supposedly were on her email, and now they've discovered they were classified after they were on her emails. But the articles are written on that show clearly that if this was true, that she had these emails that had special access, top secret special access, and she put them through her server or whatever, this leak, this is a class 1 felony. You can get up to life in prison for this. So anybody that comes and says, well, I know what's going on and this top secret, unacknowledged special access stuff, and here's what's going on, you got to remind them this is a class 1 felony. What the hell are you telling me about it for? I mean, there's always been a problem to me with people who are claiming that they have this high level secrecy thing, and they're telling everybody what's going on, because they will stop this, because this is as the Canadians point out in 1950, this is the most highly classified secret in the United States. This is the one they spend the most money putting all sorts of counterintelligence stuff around. So you basically have to me, a president who's running it, who constitutionally under 5 different aspects has to be running the program. You can't have anybody else running the program. If you look back with the MJ-12 document, and people really don't read the document, if you go back and you see the MJ-12 document, you will see that it is defined in the document that it was signed by Truman under a classified executive order. And there's only one person who can issue an executive order, and that is the President of the United States, which means MJ-12 was an executive order. It's run out of the executive office of the President. And as I've always, I wrote a book before that talked about how I believe the government was leaking this stuff. They're leaking the material with a bunch of disinformation around it, and they're protecting the classified material, and they're sort of releasing the what's called the core story of what's actually happened. And part of this core story is this idea that, for example, in 1988, just on the last days, and this may be tie into Obama. In the last days of the Reagan administration, Reagan was also very interested in UFOs. In the last days of almost like a week before the election, or 2 weeks before the election, they ran a documentary, which a lot of people in the UFO community have seen. It was called UFO Cover-Up Live. And this is where they introduced Area 51. Area 51 was first mentioned on that documentary. It's in a flowchart that was shown on the documentary. Bob Lazar would not go public on KLS TV until 6 months later. He would not even go to the site until about 6 or 7 weeks after that documentary aired. So you have Area 51, and if you look on that flowchart, it has MJ-12 out of the executive office of the president. So you have this idea that you have an MJ-12, you have a very closely guarded secret. There may only be, 20 12 people read into it. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with the fact the CIA director may not know, Defense Intelligence director may not know. You can name anybody, but if you name the president, then I got a problem with you saying that the president doesn't know, because there are a bunch of constitutional problems with the president not knowing. And I don't know if you know the story. You know the story of Bush? Have you heard me tell the story of Bush?
No.
What I say would happen if this thing was being done, for example, some guy with sunglasses and black suit walks into the president's cabinet, the day after he gets elected and says, actually, we're running the government here. We're going to run the show here, and you guys are just a bunch of puppets, and we need you to pretend you're running the government. And anybody that gets out of line, we're going to kill or whatever. And everybody's just sort of going along with this government that's being run by some secret cabal, and everybody's doesn't really have any power. Somebody would defect. And the story I tell that shows that, there's actually a couple stories, but the big one was during the Bush administration, after 9/11, Bush started this program to spy on American telephone calls, internet, all this kind of stuff, trying to pick up terrorist communications inside the United States. And what people don't realize is the assistant attorney general, or the attorney general, has to sign off on all black budget programs as being legal. And when this one came up, the guy's name was Ashcroft. John Ashcroft refused to sign it. He said, no, this is illegal. There's a black budget program. I'm not signing off on it. And so at the same time as that happened, Ashcroft had a serious appendix attack, was in intensive care in the hospital, and Bush sent two of his top guys, his chief of staff and maybe his assistant chief of staff, into the intensive care unit at the hospital to talk to Ashcroft to convince him that he had to sign this executive order for this black budget program. And Ashcroft just looked at the guy and just shook his head, and he said, I'm no longer the Attorney General. And he pointed over to Comby. And Comby is the guy that's actually running the investigation on Hillary Clinton. He's now the the FBI director. And Comby then was the assistant at the Justice Department. And Comby just shook his head like, no, I'm not signing it either. And they stormed out of the office. And they phoned Comby, and Comby was now the acting director at Justice. And they phoned Comby and they said, you've got a meeting with the president. You're to appear at the White House immediately. And he said, well, I'm not coming right away. I'm getting a lawyer. And they said, are you refusing to meet with the president of the United States? And they said, no, I'm just getting a lawyer before I come in there. And so he went in, and basically he said, no, I'm not signing it. He had the meeting with the president. He gave his dispute. He resigned. He tendered his resignation. The Attorney General Ashcroft tendered his resignation. The head of the FBI tendered his resignation. There was a dozen people at the Justice Department all tendered their resignation, saying, we don't care if he's the president of the United States. This is illegal. We're not doing it. We're resigning. And I say that if people knew, because everybody, I believe, is trying to do the right job. Everybody up there, I don't believe there's all these evil people up there. I believe they're just people who are up there who may be totally deluded and crazy or whatever, but they think they're saving the world. Everybody thinks they're saving the world. And if somebody believed this was unconstitutional and illegal, somebody would walk. And there's been 13 presidents who have dealt with the UFO issue. There's been 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans, and they've all done exactly the same thing, which indicates to me that whether right or wrong, everybody that's there believes that what they're doing is legal and constitutional. And if you take a look at it, the president, when it comes to the president knowing, you have these problems that I would walk. I mean, you take the UFO community. I mean, none of us are going along with the game. We're all fighting back. We're not buying into this thing. We're fighting back. Why would the people at the top not fight back? And you take a look, for example, if we're dealing with ETs, with extraterrestrials, we are dealing with a foreign power. Just like the Russians, just like the Chinese. There is only one person who can deal with a foreign power, who can negotiate with a foreign power, who can sign a treaty with a foreign power, and that is the head of state. That is the president of the United States. There is only one head of state. You cannot have a GS-13 down in the State Department negotiating with the aliens. You has to be the president. So if somebody realized that somebody other than the president was dealing with this very important head of state thing, somebody would walk. Somebody would say, this is illegal, it's unconstitutional, and I'm not going along with this. The other thing is this idea that he's the chief executive officer of the government. He's the top guy in the government. So if it's inside the government, then whoever's doing the cover-up, he's the top guy. Everything's flowing up to him. Same as the intelligence. There's 17 intelligence agencies, Director of National Intelligence. They all do one job. That's the only thing they do is to provide intelligence to the President of the United States. Everybody thinks that they're doing all this other stuff. All they're doing is providing intelligence to the President of the United States. So if you say, well, the CIA's got the material and they're not giving it to the President, well, who are they giving it to? The Russians? The Chinese? What are they doing with it? They give it all to the President. That's how it works. They give this stuff. They're not there to make decisions. The same as the military. People say, well, the military is making their own laws and they're doing their stuff. If you're a military, if you take a look at their oath that they take, it is to obey the President and uphold the Constitution and the law. And so if you're a general or something, and I'm the President, and you come into me and I say, okay, I want the UFO stuff. He says, well, no, Mr. President, no, we've decided you don't have a need to know, and we're running the show. I say, okay, fine, good, see you later. And I phone up my chief of staff and I say, General Lessin, I want his resignation on my desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I want his boss in here. I mean, no president would put up with it. The president is if somebody's insubordinate, the military guy's insubordinate, he's insubordinate. The president, everybody salutes, and that's how it works. And even a 3-star salutes a 4-star general. And there's these constitutional things that people would walk. But getting back to this important thing that people are sort of missing is this thing that's changed now. As I said before, it was like it was a toxic issue. Like, you did not ask this question. If you were in the White House press corps, you would not ask this question in a million years. And now they're asking, and the tone has changed. They're asking serious questions, and they're saying, for example, the one guy says, is this for real? This is an important issue. He's not saying joke, joke, joke. And then the press secretary actually rats out the president. I couldn't believe he did it. He said, well, about Area 51, I don't have a tab in my briefing book for that. I really don't know, but the president has indicated, he has joked that being president of the United States gives him access to the answer to this question. So you should ask him. It should be interesting. Wow. I could not believe it. You should ask him. So he's basically saying, ask the president.
Where is this, an article or something? Or?
No, you can go, it's on, if you go to the YouTube, these are all on YouTube. The May 11th, there's one question asked on May the 11th. This is the one where he says, the president has indicated he knows you should ask the president. That was, I think, the ABC asked that question. And then on May the 16th, and these are on YouTube as well, okay. They asked the question, and you can see again the tone has changed, where they're asking these questions like, is this for real? Are there actually extraterrestrials? And the one woman who I actually contacted, and I don't know whether she's going to do anything about it, but I actually got a message to her, and this is an African-American reporter for some agency, whatever, and she says, there's all this conversation, and this all was started by Podesta and Hillary, this whole thing, that Podesta got this, and that's why I say Podesta got this ball rolling. And she says, about Roswell, and I need to know, is this real? Are you holding this back because of national security? And then she looks at the guy, and she says, look, you're doing the dance. You're at the podium, you're doing the dance. She said, look, you're drinking water. You're trying to figure out what you're going to say to me. I mean, is this for real? Are there actually extraterrestrials coming here? And you can see, like, this is a serious question. Like, she's saying, and then he says to her, there are certain questions that I don't have the answer to. And then she says to him, I couldn't believe it. She says, you're not going to get away with this. And then he says to her, you just keep trying. And so the tone of the questions has changed. It's like and that's what I always said would happen is once the media suddenly wakes up and realizes that the president has been briefed, that there is a story, that there's something here, then it all changes, because then it's not joke, joke, joke. Then it's like the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. Somebody's going to say, there's a story here. I'm going to hire like the Washington Post did a couple years ago. 6 or 7 reporters, you put them on a story for 2 years on secrecy. They did the whole thing on top secret stuff in the U.S. government. So they put 6 reporters on for 2 years. They spend amounts of money. They talk to all their sources and stuff, and they flush the story out. And that's what's happening now. The tone has changed, where the only thing that has not happened yet is Obama has not had a news conference. So we're waiting now to see when Obama comes back, they're going to ask him the question. And the question is this thing for real? And we're going to see what Obama says. And it was almost done like a couple days ago because Obama has not had a news conference. The story sort of died. It sort of died out. And then Podesta goes back in and stirs it up again on this interview he did a couple days ago in San Francisco to this sort of computer group there.
Do you have a list of the links to these YouTubes and articles?
Yep.
Could you
So there's
send
one.
or
Sure.
the link to the link of all the links?
Yeah.
And I'll put that on your page here on Aquarian Radio. I think that's what Steve Bassett was saying. We talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he said that the UFO issue is on the table as an appropriate issue to talk about with the press reporter. It's no longer right.
Yeah.
And that was the new thing.
Yeah,
So.
and I think this is all Podesta. It's all Podesta's doing because he's wanted this issue right, and he couldn't get anybody to move on. He couldn't get Clinton to do it. He couldn't get Obama to do it. And now, as I said, he's built the box. And he's built this box. And what has happened now? What has Podesta has created? He's created a situation where the White House press corps is waiting for Obama to walk in the room, and they're going to ask him, what's the deal with UFOs? Is this thing for real? And they're serious questions. These three reporters are very serious. That it's not like joke. They're saying, is this thing for real? What's the deal? And so Podesta, when the story starts to die, Podesta goes on this group, and he's doing this interview, and that's when he mentions the fact that the black budget. This stuff should be to the public instead of going to black budget programs. And he stirs it up again. And then, of course, he starts doing articles again. And so it's almost like he knew that it wasn't going to get to Hillary. I thought first he put Hillary in a box. Like, why would he put Hillary in this box? Because no matter what Hillary does, if, for example, Hillary goes into the office and she says, okay, because this is a big issue now. So now they say to her when she gets in, okay, what happened with the UFO thing? And so she says, okay, it's national security. I can't release it. It's game over because she's confirmed it. She's confirmed the story. This is what has always missed with the media is the media never thought there was a story. But if she says I can't release it because there's this anti-gravity stuff, it's classified. She's confirmed the cover-up. She's confirmed that it's for real. There's a story, and that ignites the press. And that's what you need is to wake up the press. And I believe the press has been woken up. That's where Steve and I agree is that the tone has changed. It's not a toxic issue. The press suddenly realizes there's a story here. They never believed there was a story. When you get the New York Times doing a straight-up piece that basically looks at this, and you get John Podesta doing it, so that's where he's created, and I think he's almost like he's created a box to force Obama to disclose before he leaves. So it's going to save Hillary, because I couldn't figure out why would he do this to Hillary. But maybe he's doing it to Obama. That he tried to get Obama to do it, and he said, okay, you're not going to do it. And then he created this situation where he got the media to ask about it, through Hillary, made it a big issue, and because Hillary always gets away with it because she says, well, if John Podesta wants it, I'm going along with it because I want open government. I believe in an open government. I want transparency. So it's worked to her benefit that he's not really. It doesn't affect her. John's taking the rap for the whole thing, and yet the story is big because Hillary Clinton's name is around it, and Obama is now in the box, and we'll see what happens.
Just one thing that I suspect is that if there's full information or enough information about the anti-grav craft and their capacity to defend Washington, the whole Twin Towers non-defense becomes open, and that's what I think the people in government are really afraid of, disclosing the murders that they've perpetrated under false flags.
Yeah, so Obama answers a question, and one of those three reporters asks, what do you imagine he will say?
Well, that's going to be interesting because he's never lied about it. I mean, he's probably tried to joke with it. He'll probably use the old, the aliens told us we couldn't release it. Something to that effect. It's going to try to joke his way out of the thing. The key thing is that the media are seriously asking this question. And if he does, all he has to do is say, I got briefed or something like that. It's over. I mean, and you could have Twin Towers. You can have all sorts of stuff. What I say, the big thing that they don't want is a consciousness thing. They don't want this whole consciousness thing sort of unraveling the fact that there's this other aspect where, not just you don't need oil, but the fact that this is really not a physical phenomena, that there's all this other stuff going on, and it's this complex thing that we really don't understand, majority of it. And because the technical stuff, they could sort of walk around because you're never going to know. They're never going to release how an atomic bomb was built or how a hydrogen bomb was built. So that kind of stuff, people will let them get away with. but it's all the rest of the stuff about, how do they get here? Because that's the ultimate question. And the way they get here is not through anti-gravity type stuff. It's this whole thing of the fact that there's no time and space, that they're able to move like an entangled particle through time and space. And that's the kind of stuff where, it starts to show that the government really doesn't either have it, and they really kept the whole thing secret. But that's where this guy was telling me that they don't want their fingerprints on it, they want it out. They realize they're in a box, because I wrote an article which is on my website called "The Reasons They've Decided Not to Tell You the Truth," and I list about 65 reasons. And and I don't have the one reason now is the fact that the president is running the show. That's the main secret. The main secret is the president's running the show. They don't want you to know that. Everything else they'll talk about, but they don't want you to identify the person who can actually answer the questions. They want you to think the Wizard of Oz did it or something, so you can't do any interviews. And plus it's conspiratorial and nobody believed it. But I wrote this article, and there are so many things. I always said, if I gave the briefing to anybody with the 65 reasons, everybody would do exactly what they're doing. They'd say, well, yeah, I don't want to do this, like with well, Mr. President, we're not saying it's going to happen, but I mean, the stock market could melt down. We're not 100% sure, and the president's going to go, holy cow, I don't know. You start thinking, and they say, well, give us 5 more years, Mr. President. If the aliens are evil, we can fight them off better, and we can better understand this, get farther ahead of the Russians and the Chinese, and you can drill another oil well. And drill another oil well. Yeah, go ahead, drill another. The president is not. They all want to go down in the history book as being, the guy who, like Barack Obama, got unemployment from 10 down to 4.9%, and brought some this and brought that and brought in health care for some people, and they want to be good guys. They want to go down. They don't want to be the guy that had the sort of the world come to an end for a couple of years until it all got sort of shaken out. Because as I say, if you get these scenarios, like the stock market is the big one. If you get a scenario like with 9/11, they shut the stock market. And the only reason they could reopen the stock market after 9/11, after 3 or 4 days, whatever they had it closed, was the fact that they said, well, if anybody stands up on a plane and tries to hijack a plane, we're going to shoot them. We're going to have people on the planes that are armed. And everybody would go, oh, okay, they've got it under control. They figure out what to do, and okay, now maybe we'll fly again. But what do you do if the UFO thing? I mean, if the stock market starts to melt down, a bunch of 2% of the people decide they're going to start selling their energy shares, and then everybody else starts selling, and this meltdown starts. How do you reopen the stock market? The only way you can reopen it is to convince the people you've got the situation under control, and they do not have the situation. They have no idea what's going on. I mean, they may have some basic technology and a basic understanding of what's going on, but in terms of understanding, like, the question about Mr. President's been, your Constitution is responsible for the protection of the American people. It's been estimated that, tens of millions of people have been abducted by these aliens. What are you doing to stop it? I mean, you go, and he looks like an idiot. They're not going to put him out there to answer that, or the cattle mutilation question, or there's a million questions he can't answer. Yeah. And the president he's like, there's even a piece on CBC radio here in Canada today talking about the difference between Canada and the United States, is that the president of the United States has become like the Pope. He has become like, like a king. He's almost like religious, like a religious cloak around the president of the United States. In Canada, when you're the prime minister, you get kicked out. You may run into the guy at the bookstore the next week. There is no Secret Service protecting the guy for the rest of his life. He's just an ordinary citizen, and he's treated like an ordinary citizen. There is none of this, this guy walks on water. But in the United States, the president walks on water, and you do not put the president in a position in anything to. That's why when you ever have a scandal, with the Iran-Contra, you have a colonel in the basement of the White House takes the rap and he goes down with the ship. And that's the way it works, because the president cannot be influenced. Or Ron Pandolfi, who was the top CIA scientist, and he's the guy who ran the Weird Desk. He did the UFO stuff. When he was asked about the briefing for the president, he said he did, I believe, the counterintelligence thing. He said, we tell the president what he needs to know and hope we don't have to put him down. And I went, whoa! And it's like, but he was never arrested. He was never cured, because that was the cover story. And it's basically, he said presidents cannot be players, and that is true. The president cannot be a player, because if everybody knows that the president is playing, then suddenly he gets started asking questions. And the cover up, once you start asking the president questions, once you realize the president may know, he may have been briefed, How long is it going to take how long can they hold the cover up together? I mean, it's going to come apart right away because it's going to be like 2,000 reporters on the White House lawn, and they're all going to realize this is the story of the millennium, and I'm going to get it. And it'll unravel very, very fast. But still now people you can see it's changing, but they still have the doubt that the president has been briefed. If it becomes known, and that's why I said to this woman, this African-American reporter, I said, if you get a chance to ask Obama the question, do not ask him, what do you think about UFOs? Do not ask him anything. He will walk around it with a joke. The only question you ask him is, Mr. President, have you been briefed on this subject? If so, when was it, and what were you told? Now, let's hope she does it. This is a woman that asked the question in the last month. She asked that to Obama. We could get somewhere, and even his reaction, even the way he'll stumble and stuff, because even she said to the press secretary, she knew he was lying. She said, "You're doing the dance. You're at the podium. You're doing the dance. I can see. You're drinking. You're trying to figure out what you're going to say." And she didn't believe anything he was saying. So this distrust is in the media now, which was never in the media before.
Wow.
Sasha has a question.
Well, it's just that what you're saying is entirely consistent with some of the history that I've been reading. John Lake talks about President Roosevelt had decided to go public, and so the deliberate hiring of Orson Welles to do H.G. Wells' story, to make this big panic, was all to impress the president of his need for secrecy, even though Roosevelt's inclination and statements he made was, we've got to tell the public. And so what you're saying, it's entirely consistent with what you're saying.
In fact, there's two examples I use in this appendix. I have two examples that show that this is exactly what happens. For example, you have, if you remember, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, before he went in, he was the congressman who was in the district when they had the swamp gas. That was in his district. And, of course, he was inundated by people saying, we want something done about this. And he believed that, he would put in these queries to the Air Force and he'd get all these stupid answers back. And he said, we should not only have an investigation, we should take the people that know about this and put them under oath and find out what's going on. This is garbage what the government's putting out. And so when you look at the Ford Library, there are 1,700 pages of documents, UFO documents, at the Ford Library. And I knew the guy had done the index on this. This guy in Michigan had done the index. So I said to him, well, how many were there after he was president? And he said, I don't know. And I said, I think I know. So I contacted the Ford Library and I said, how many documents? You got 1,700 pages of UFO documents. How many pages are there after he was president? And they said, none. Yeah. So he was onto the UFO thing. As soon as he got in there, and I know because I know somebody who talked to him and he was briefed. When he got in there, he realized what the game was, because people don't realize when you're the president and you go in there, they don't say to you, okay, Mr. President, we have aliens in the basement here, and we've got anti-gravity craft and stuff like this, and here, sign the secrecy oath. No, you sign the secrecy oath, then they tell you what's going on. And they could throw him in jail the same as they can throw anybody else in jail. And plus, you don't want to be the president hasn't leaked anything on any sort of subject. He doesn't come out and say how many foreign leaders have been assassinated. It's his cover-up. I mean, it's his neck that's going to get hung if this all falls apart. The same with Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter said, if I become president, I'll release, and he made almost the same promise that Hillary Clinton was making. If I get in, unless it's got to do with weapons, he said, I will release the material. And when he got in, both he and Gerald Ford never used the word UFO. Take a look at it. Never used the word UFO while they were in the White House. As these two guys that were adamant about UFOs, and suddenly they get in and they get the briefing. And one of the stories that I put in there, which is a dramatic story, that for the people who believe that there is some secret cabal, Jimmy Carter's always been the guy. He's Mr. Honesty guy, taught Sunday school since he was a teenager. He always tells the truth and all this kind of stuff. And Jimmy Carter is saying, oh, no, I don't believe extraterrestrials have been here, and this is his latest version of the story. There's a story told Senator Claiborne Pell, when he was still the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, was the top-ranking Democratic senator. John Alexander and Scott Jones were working together at one point, and they talked to Scott Jones knew Claiborne Pell. He worked for Claiborne Pell. He knew Claiborne Pell very well. So he got Claiborne Pell to write a letter to Jimmy Carter after he was out of the White House that Alexander and Scott Jones would be in Atlanta. and he would like Carter to talk to them about UFOs. So Scott Jones tells the story that they sit there and they wait, and there's no response coming back from the Carter Center. So he phones the Carter Center and he said, Senator Claiborne Pell sent this letter to Jimmy Carter, and we're just wondering when there's going to be when we can get a response. And the response they got was, there will be no response. And this is significant because Claiborne Pell was the ranking Democrat. So for him to snub the ranking Democrat and basically walk out of this meeting, it clearly shows that he really didn't want to be asked about UFOs. And that's the whole thing with Pandolfi says the president can't be a player. And that's why you start taking a look at some of the stuff, and it starts making sense. Once you realize the president knows. Lawrence Rockefeller, for example, Stephen Greer says, I sent these briefings to the president, to Bill Clinton, and I briefed Bill Clinton twice through his friend, this Kevin guy or whatever. And when I went to the Clinton library and I got all the documents, and there are a lot of documents that are in there from Greer, this briefing package. It's like hundreds of pages. Most of the stuff is Greer stuff out of the 900 pages under the UFO file, or the Greer stuff. But it says right on the front page of the front cover of all these documents, President did not read. And this is the whole deal. So Greer is saying, I briefed the president. He never got to the president. The same as Lawrence Rockefeller. Lawrence Rockefeller did the initiative, and he was a powerful guy. So he goes to the White House, and he gets cut off by the science advisor. And the science advisor is keeping him away from the president because he never got to the president. And that's the thing. The president can't be a player. The president is running the cover-up. You can't have Lawrence Rockefeller having meetings with the president. He knows what's going on. He doesn't need to listen to Lawrence Rockefeller. As Bill Clinton described to Lawrence Rockefeller, this is like this tar baby story. Mm-hmm. It's the whole deal. You touch it and you get dragged in, so you keep the president away from it, and you don't let him touch the story. So he didn't get to the president, and at the ranch, the story was told that the Clintons went to the ranch. I told you the story that the swing voters and all that sort of stuff. When they went there, Marie Galbraith, who was the main person who was running the Rockefeller UFO stuff for him, Marie Galbraith told Antonio Huneeus, who wrote the Rockefeller report, and Huneeus told me, she said she was absolutely sure Bill Clinton did not sit down at that briefing. When Rockefeller did the briefing, only Hillary Clinton sat down for the briefing. So he's at the ranch. Why would he not go downstairs and sit there and listen to Lawrence Rockefeller? Because the president can't be a player. He can't be involved. That's why he could only get to the science advisor. He wasn't there. Only Hillary Clinton was there. And the next morning after the briefing, no questions were asked, Hillary Clinton said to Lawrence Rockefeller, okay, we've listened to what you've said. Now don't ever bring up the subject again. And when you look at the Rockefeller documents, these 1,000 pages of documents, the two from Hillary Clinton are very significant. One is that she's helping edit a letter on UFO disclosure to the president. And when they did the first briefing for the science advisor, Scott Jones and Rockefeller went in there with Lawrence Rockefeller's lawyer. They went in there and they did the briefing. They stopped on the way out of the White House at Hillary Clinton's office, and they talked to Hillary Clinton's deputy. Hillary Clinton wasn't in the office at the time. And then the second document appears that shows that everything going from Rockefeller to the science advisor and everything from the science advisor to Rockefeller was going through the First Lady's office. And this is another thing. I discovered these documents in 2000. It wasn't until 6 months ago suddenly the light came on as to why that happened. The reason is the president is running the cover-up. The president can't be a player. The president can't be in the middle of this thing. So everything is going through the First Lady's office. She's not in the government. She goes at night with the documents with the president, sits down with him and says, here's what's happening. Rockefeller wants this, and he gives the orders. He's out of the loop. It's unofficial. She's the contact to the president to keep the president out of the loop. And you start looking at all these things, and it all makes sense why all these presidents have never really answered the thing. It's always people covering for them. And I will concede that a lot of people may be out of the loop, but there's no way the president, to me, is out of the loop.
Now, Linda,
it's credible deniability. Yeah.
Linda had a long part of her presentation, the last one before I came to do the show, was about a briefing that Ronald Reagan had in 1981. Oh, yeah. And he was briefed. Yeah. And she had a lot of notes that were taken and had Ronald's response. And so he apparently knew the whole deal. Do you have information to that?
Well, again, that comes out of the Serpo stuff. And the Serpo stuff...
Yes.
It's this gradual disclosure thing. I mean, if you've got Serpo stuff, I mean, this is a Class 1 felony. I mean, if the FBI, you can track down who put the stuff out. I mean, you can it'd be very take them like 5 minutes to figure out where the stuff's coming from, because the email server or the guy that's receiving it and where it's coming from and stuff. It wouldn't take them very long at all to find out who it is. So this is not legitimate material. I don't care what anyone says. None of it's legitimate material, but it does have legitimate material in it. For example, Kit Green, who was the ran the Weird Desk at the CIA before Ron Pandolfi. There's this Mirage Men. The guys that do the Mirage Men book and the documentary, they had this idea, there's no UFOs, it's all just government disinformation covering, Air Force programs, and there's no aliens and all this kind of stuff. And they were interviewing Kit Green, and they asked Kit Green about this, and they're talking about Serpo, and then Kit Green says, oh, no, don't throw Serpo out. He said, there's classified material in there. And this guy who was doing the interview said he could feel the hair going out on the back of his neck, and he started to sweat, and he's going, what the heck's he saying? What do you mean it's classified material? And Kit Green's saying, no, this is for real. And that's when Kit Green says, well, what would you do? If you had the problem, what would you do? Well, you'd make up these stories. Oh, the aliens are eating our kids, and they're doing this, and they're doing that. And then if the story breaks, and it's like, ETs are visiting, and the people go, wait, what, they're not eating our kids? No? Oh, what's the big deal then? And so it's this thing, you wrap it up, and this is Kit Green telling this story. So the Serpo material has legitimate stuff in it. And Ronald Reagan did know. In fact, people say, when the president stands up and says this thing's for real, well, then I'll believe it. And I said, well, he did. And nobody pays any attention. Same as John Podesta says. There are classified documents that can be declassified. And it just goes over everybody's head, and everybody just goes on, and what's the latest sighting, and do you see this latest video? And it's like, nobody's paying attention to what's going on.
What did Reagan say that says
what happened in Spielberg, we got Spielberg on video, on audio, talking about this. When E.T. the extraterrestrial, and this is one of the things that E.T. was the story of the live alien, that was the guest of the U.S. government. Yeah. This was a legitimate story. And they as they do with all this disinformation stuff, if you want to tell a story, if you're a top secret agent and you want to tell your story, you can tell your story, but you got to change all the names and put it in a movie and fictionalize the whole thing. So E.T. was a real deal. But anyway, because the president can't go to the movie theater, he has a White House theater, and there's 39 people in the room. This was end of June 1982. They're screening E.T. the extraterrestrial. Spielberg brings the movie there, and he's sitting there. There's two different stories, and both I believe are true. Well, the one is true because Spielberg told it. And near the end of the movie, Reagan leans over to Spielberg and he says, I bet you there aren't 6 people in this room know that how true this whole thing is. And he told that to Jimmy Shandere, who was a film producer out of Los Angeles. They were doing a project in Japan. He told that story. But the story that Spielberg told in public, and that was that when the movie was over, E.T. the extraterrestrial was over, Reagan stood up, and we know there was 39 people in the room. I know exactly who there was. The ambassador to the U.S., Great Britain was there. The CIA director was there. Bunch of high-level people were in the room. And Reagan stood up, and according to Spielberg, and this is on tape, Spielberg says, and Reagan stood up and he looked around the room as if he was doing a head count. And he said, Stephen, we'd like to thank you for bringing E.T. the extraterrestrial to the White House. And I'd just like to let you know that there probably, no, and I'd like to let you know that there probably aren't 6 people in this whole room who know how true that everything on that screen is. And he said it without smiling, Spielberg adds. And he said it without smiling. And everybody laughed. And Spielberg said, but he said it without smiling. So he basically said, this thing's for real. And we made it public. We put it out there. And nobody really pays attention and say, well, the president hasn't said anything. And a lot of them have indicated, fairly clearly that, it's for real. But they can't, they're in a box. I feel sorry for the president because what do you do? And one of the other things that people always forget is that this thing is very highly classified, and there's a lot of material. There's the anti-gravity stuff, but there's the consciousness stuff, which I say is one of the critical things. When in 1947 they recovered the Roswell crash and there was a live alien, and the alien was talking in their heads, believe you me, that's classified material. I mean, if we can figure out how to do this, talk in someone's head, man, this is what we need, and that's very highly classified. So that's the kind of stuff that puts the president in this terrible box where he has to be running the thing constitutionally, but you have to protect him. And people always forget the fact that there is as much money spent in a black program on security as there is on the program. So in the UFO world, everybody sort of forgets about the security. It's like, oh, this guy came and told me this, and it's like, come on, man. There's all sorts of disinformation around these programs. Nobody's running around telling you top secret material because they're going to go to jail. It's like Stephen Greer told the story. Oh, there was, when in 1992, when he first started, he said there was CIA agents flying from Washington to North Carolina to tell him to go ahead with it and stuff. There's no way that would happen. I mean, there's no way you're going to put the CIA agent's going to, go and tell someone that they're violate their security oaths and say the most highly classified secret in the country. You need to get to the bottom of this thing. It just doesn't happen because it's so risky for people to do. So what they do is this sort of half-baked thing where they're gradually leaking material, and Obama's done a lot of it. And like you take a look at the this thing with Chase Brandon happened on the 65th anniversary of Roswell. The Corso thing happened on the 50th anniversary of Roswell. You start looking at the pattern and you see sort of what they're doing, that they're sort of doing the best they can. But what are you going to do if you're in that sort of box? Because it's your cover-up. It's your neck that's going to be affected if things go south. And so that's what I was told by these inside people. They can't figure out how they're going to do it. They're trying to get someone to do it, and that's where I thought, good for Podesta. I mean, Podesta forced the issue. I mean, he set this situation, which is now in a situation where they're waiting for the president to ask him if he's been briefed, and if he hesitates, if he who knows what's going to happen. And if they accept it and say, oh yeah, it's a joke, well, then it may die out. But the attitude's changed.
Wow. What about the experiencers? What's their role in all this? How do you see that unfolding?
Well, I think the beings have gone. They've apparently, they've gone to the government and nothing happened, and they're taking the message to the people that this it's going to happen through the people, and that's why you have the MILABs, because the government's trying to figure out what's going on as well, and they're trying to control this thing, but the aliens are in charge of everything. They're in charge of that's where Obama made the joke. The aliens won't let us do it. They're in control. And it was like, that's right. That's exactly what's
That's right, yeah.
And so, it's always comes down to national security, that the alien craft have killed a whole number of our flyers who you see words like disintegrated, plane missing. These are ace flyers from Korea, and one of the programs we heard, there's like 150 Americans who have been scrambled, felt they were getting fired upon the alien craft, and their craft disintegrated while other pilots watched that happen. And so we don't have security. That's
so
part
basically,
of what's
it's the
happening.
day the Earth stood still, and those who were exposed to that movie, the original one, not the Keanu Reeves one, but the original one, is that they had control of everything. They came in, they stopped all the power for the whole planet.
Yeah, and that's the kind of scenario where if the president, if it sort of breaks that the president has been briefed, then those are the questions that are going to be asked. I mean, can they do this? Can they do this? And it's like 64 questions a minute. And it never stops. Like Stanton says, they can just say, okay, aliens have been here, and we're not going to talk about the rest. That ain't going to happen. There's no way. I mean, it all just goes viral. I mean, like if the president says, yeah, this thing's for real, you could have people saying, now it's declassified, and you have all sorts of people coming forward with, high stories. Or what'll happen is you have all these Washington Post people, New York Times people, who have all these high-level intelligence sources who they've never asked a UFO question. But if suddenly Obama indicates it's for real, then they're going to go, holy shit, let's go and talk to all these, they got all these sources and say, oh, is this for real, Obama? And it starts to unravel. And that's the whole thing is, it's not so much maybe what it, any particular issue that's bad. It's just you can't control anything. Once you spill the milk, you can't put the milk back in, and it just sort of goes out of control. It's going to be like the Monica Lewinsky thing. It's going to happen like instantaneously. It's going to be very, very fast. That's why I say that Podesta may have built the box for Obama and not Hillary. I can't see this thing lasting to her going into office. This thing's unraveling pretty fast.
How do you think the extraterrestrials respond to the information coming out? They're certainly monitoring everything we do, and we'll know.
Well, I think for them, it's my idea that anything that happens is consciousness raising. So if it does open up and it whatever happens, we can see it as bad, if stock market melts down or if there's riots or, religious conflicts or, whatever. I mean, that we see it as bad, but if you look at it in a reincarnation sense of the world, it's just experience. And so well, Steve Bassett has his opinion, and so does Podesta. You'd say to Podesta, I mean, I'm sure if you said to him, well, this could happen, that could happen, you're going to force this issue and all these things are going to happen, Podesta would say, I really don't care. It's open government. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. We need the people to know. You can't hide behind, we can't tell the people for this reason or that reason and keep them in the people should know. The more they know, the better off they are. It's that basic principle, and I think the aliens be the same thing. Is whatever happens it's going to raise consciousness big time, real fast, and whatever happens is to the good, even though it may be short-term pain.
In general field theory, it's the perturbations that makes the system either destruct or reconstellate at a more inclusive level. And I think that I agree with you. After the chaos and the shakeout, the perturbation, as Preacher Gene would call it, we have a possibility of a much broader conscious entity of the world polity.
Oh, absolutely. Even just the basic thing, one of the main reasons is if it becomes known, it goes back to the Ronald Reagan where he said to the high school in Maryland, did the alien invasion thing and then added, we'd realize we're all just God's creatures. And it comes down to it'll no longer be the United States of America running the world. The United States of America will just be another couple of goldfish in the fishbowl. It's like there's going to be no nationalism. It's sort of like we are one world. I mean, it's just so many things. Attitudes will change, and that's the kind of stuff that the aliens really, I think, would want out there. And people don't realize this. That's why it might be an idea for people to go and look at this article. The 60, the reasons they've decided not to tell you the truth. You start looking at the stuff and you go, oh, I didn't realize that. You look at it, and that's where you sort of feel sorry for the president in there. And that's what sort of started me years ago already. Because what I would do is I'd go to presidential libraries, and I had the same thing as everybody else. Like, oh, these evil, evil guys up there and stuff. And I'd go to the Eisenhower Library, and I would say to them, they got 28 million pages of stuff, and I'd say, okay, I want all the UFO stuff, and they, you'd file, and it'd be a guy, archivist helping you and stuff like that. And I'd book to go in there for a week, and I'd be through the documents in about 2 hours, because there are no documents there. There's nothing there. And then I go, well, what the heck am I going to do for the next rest of the week, and I have nothing to do. So I found these things called oral histories, and they're really interesting. If anybody goes to a presidential library, and what it is like, Sasha, say you're the chef for President Obama, and then when you leave the White House, they say, Sasha, we got to do an interview, and you do an exit interview, and they say, what was it like to work for cook for the president? Did he ever come at 3 o'clock in the morning and raid the fridge, and what was his favorite food? And they ask all these questions, and you tell what your story was in the White House. So they interview all the high level guys like Rumsfeld, all the evil guys, Cheney and Rumsfeld and Kissinger and stuff, and I would read all these oral histories. And when I started looking at them, I was going I would have these ideas of certain events that had happened in history that, this is a bad thing. And then I'd read the guy's explanation of why he did this, and I go, yeah, that kind of makes sense, And I lost this idea of these guys being evil. It was just like they had sort of these rational explanations of why they were doing the things they were doing in the government. They just seemed like ordinary people that, as I said, maybe deluded, but they actually believed they were doing the right thing. So that sort of changed my attitude on this evil thing. And even when you come down, you're going to see this thing with Hillary now about she is behind the scenes very, very forceful. She was basically running the White House, very hard to get along with, would swear at the Secret Service and stuff like this. And this book coming out at the end of the month, we'll talk about this kind of stuff. But she, I forgot, I lost my train of thought, but she's
not evil, or she is evil. No, she's.
Yeah, everybody has these problems in behind the scenes that they have these type of things, but in basic. Basically, they're all sort of trying to do the things, and that's when I discovered one of the other big things I think that the UFO community's got off the rails when it comes to this thing about does the president know, and that is the whole thing about the speech, the last speech given by Eisenhower. That was one of the things I discovered going through these oral histories. Is all the oral histories are there, and I was looking at, and they have an index of certain subjects, and I was like, oh, the final speech, the military-industrial complex speech. And I went, holy cow. And there was, I think at that point, there were 6 people inside the White House who had commented on the speech. And one of them was Milton Eisenhower, who was the brother of the president. And they were all asking, well, what do you think he was talking about with the speech? And everybody said the same thing. And that was, we interpreted it as a UFO thing, that, beware the military-industrial complex, the government, they've got the UFO thing, and this is what started this whole thing that Eisenhower knew, and then Kennedy didn't know. Kennedy was cut out, that Eisenhower was warning people that he'd lost control of the UFO situation and stuff like that. And then Kennedy knew, and then the bizarre story is then it's like, but he was going to give the stuff to the Russians, so they whacked him. And it's like, well, did he know or did he not know? But the story is that this famous speech was beware the military-industrial complex. But if you read the oral histories in there, you suddenly realize that it had nothing to do with UFOs at all. It was beware the military-industrial congressional complex. And all 6 people talked about this. And what it was what the problem in the United States is that if you're a congressman in California and you're building the prime example is A1 tanks. So you're building Abrams tanks and you've got this deal and the congressman's got 10,000 jobs in his district and building these tanks, and then suddenly the Congress or president decides he wants to shut down tanks. You've got a congressman who's blocking it. You're not shutting this down. I'm going to lose 10,000 jobs. And that's what he was warning about, was the deals between congressmen and the military to have these factories and build weapons. And as he said, beware the military-industrial complex, that it would get out of control, that you couldn't stop it once you did. And the Abrams tank is a prime example. There was an article written called Tanks but no thanks, and it was talking about trying to shut down the Abrams tanks, and they could not stop the factory from building the tanks. The Army said, we don't want any more A1 tanks, and they kept building them, and they kept coming, and they couldn't stop them from building these A1 tanks. And that was what he was warning about. And they took the congressional out of the speech because one of his advisors had said, don't offend Congress. So they took the word congressional out, and that's where it became the military-industrial complex speech. And so you see these things when you're in there, and that sort of fits the scenario. And it's the old idea. It's like if you're all these people, how do you suddenly stop it? Say Eisenhower knows. How do you suddenly stop Kennedy from knowing? You suddenly decide, okay, there's like all these people who know you're running this. Okay, we're all going to get together, and we're not going to tell the president anymore. That doesn't make any sense. It's very hard in a government to shut something down. Once something is, like, for example, this MJ-12 being an executive order and being in the executive office of the president, how do you suddenly move it out of the executive office of the president? It's very hard in the government. Nothing changes in the government. Once something is done a certain way, it's done a certain way. And presidents don't want to give up their powers any more than, congressmen want to give up their power to create laws or whatever they're doing. You start seeing these things in different perspectives. But I started looking at it, and you start looking at these examples. Like, Kennedy supposedly didn't know, and yet Tim Good tells the story very clearly of talking to the pilot of the Air Force One that he was flown down to Florida to see the bodies. Well, if he did that, he knew. Nixon showed the bodies to Gleason. You have the story of Bush, and when you come to this book at the end of the month, people will say, "Oh, Hillary was this evil person." Well, if you're going to go by that, the top guy. The number one guy that the Secret Service loved was George Bush Sr. and his wife. They are on the top of the list of all the presidents. So he was this evil UFO guy who's killing all these people and doing whatever, but the Secret Service thought he was the greatest guy in the world, in behind the scenes. And it was Bush, the famous story told that Carter asked for the UFO files from Bush. Danny Sheehan tells the story, but Danny Sheehan gets it a little bit wrong because he said, President Bush. Well, Bush never served under President Carter at all. So you have this idea that Bush and Cheney and all they're the MJ-12 guys, and they control the thing, and the president doesn't have any control. And Bush refused Jimmy Carter the UFO stuff. He didn't. He said, if you want these files, you have to go to the House Science and Technology Committee. If the top secret files, the Roswell stuff, is not going to be in the House Science and Technology Committee. What he was asking for was the files for the people. The classified stuff, yes, but I want the files for the people, the regular stuff. And he said, if you want those files, you got to go to the House. And so you make the point. He said, Jimmy Carter, he was this guy, and they wouldn't tell him what was going on. Jimmy Carter was an A personality. He fired people left, right, and center. I talked to people in his had worked for him. They were scared to death of this guy. He was like really, really an A-type personality. And he fired George Bush. So he wasn't afraid of George Bush. George Bush never served a day as CIA director. He didn't trust him, and he brought in Stansfield Turner. He was in the Navy with Carter, and he trusted Stansfield Turner. He didn't trust Bush, and he fired him. So he wasn't afraid. Big UFO guy, who cares? I fired him, and he said, if I hadn't fired him, he never would have been president. And so, start seeing things in different perspectives. That's what I do in this book. I spend a lot of time at the end going through this argument, and people will still argue, no, the president's out of the loop and stuff like that. And I can agree with anybody but the president. CIA director, the people out of the loop, they really don't need to know. But constitutionally, you have to have the president knowing. Okay.
Yeah, so he just maintains a plausible deniability.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I have a question. Okay, so Obama does his answers to the question. He said, yes, I've been briefed, and everything flows and happens. What happens to the election? Do we end up having an election? Does Hillary win because, it was Podesta that revealed this to the world? What do you think happens next after this?
I just think it's going to unravel. Something's going to happen very, very dramatic and very, very fast.
Form of government? Will Obama stay president?
Anything could happen. Anything could happen. I don't know. I almost dread the day. I mean, I had this discussion with Dolan a couple of weeks ago, and Dolan said there's not going to do it. And I said, the question's coming. I mean, all he has to do is stumble, and they get the idea. It's going to unravel. I mean, it's and I don't know what would happen. I mean, it's like there's going to be just like an inundation of reporters, and you're going to have all these things about why we've been lied to, why did this happen, why did that happen, and maybe they've got something planned, or maybe it's just Podesta who says, I really don't care what happens. We need open government. We need this. Because Podesta's big. If you've seen, he just did a speech just a couple of days ago. Big speech on global warming. Huge presentation on global warming. And that's where I'm starting to think he's an experiencer. So he's basically saying we're running out of time, and I want to push this issue. And he knows what's going on. He knows there's something there, and he's forcing it out. And maybe doesn't really care what happens.
The president could pardon in advance those who have been who don't hide the classified things that they promised they would hide.
Yeah. And you could have a situation where, like, Reagan says, everything on the screen is true, or Podesta says, there are classified files that can be declassified. I mean, he may stand up and say, yeah, I've been briefed and there's something to it, and nobody will do anything. I mean, that's a possibility too. I'm just amazed. Like Chase Brandon coming out and saying it's for real, they're extraterrestrials, and there were bodies, and nobody did anything. I talked to the Huffington Post reporter, and he had a second interview, and I said, well, now ask him this. He says, well, no, we're off the record. I can't ask him that. We're going to have a couple of beers. I said, come on, the story just died. Nobody cared. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
So
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I just think that nothing may happen, but it's got to go there. And what I say, the key thing to remember on all this as you're watching, because you're going to see Hillary making a comment, different things happening. Always remember the same thing: watch the puppet master, not the puppet. John Podesta. Watch everything he does. Look at his material, and you'll see that he's doing something behind the scenes. I'm just amazed. The more I look at him, the more I realize how smart this guy is and how he's manipulating this disclosure thing. And I think Steve would agree with me now, too. You can talk to him about Podesta, the role of Podesta. He's the key in this whole thing. But Hillary has not brought it up, not once. She's only answered 4 questions. She has never brought up the subject.
So there's an article that says the Americans can handle the truth. Can they handle the truth?
Oh, I think eventually. I mean, that's the whole. Sasha and I were talking about. That's the whole thing is whatever happens, it's experience. I mean, it may look ugly at the beginning, but it's all to the good. It's never going to be good to not have consciousness raising. The more consciousness raising, the more answers we have. I mean, it's like you and I. We all know what's going on. I mean, none of us have jumped off a bridge. You're going to have a lot of the Shermer team is going to jump off the bridge. I mean, there's a lot of skeptics.
We're out of time, Grant.
Yep.
Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. You bet.
Toronto.
And thank you, all our listeners. I hope you enjoyed our show and have a wonderful day.
Aloha.
Aloha.